happy Mother's Day. Tomorrow is Mother's Day. I know it's an exciting time of the year. You're probably thinking like, well, I'm gonna make some sparkly cocktails for my mother. I'm gonna make some flowery cocktails. But because World Whiskey Day is approaching on May 15th, I decided, well, why not introduce a little bit of bourbon whiskey to the holiday tomorrow on Mother's Day. And so with that, in lieu of World Whiskey Day, which is coming up in May 15th, I just wanted to show off a little bit of bourbon whiskey for everyone here. So we're just gonna go ahead and get started. First of all, disclaimer, I have never been a bartender. I've only bar backed briefly. So a lot of the mixology I do is at home, self-taught, but feel free to follow along if you do have the ingredients for the whiskey sour, which is we're gonna start off right now. So we have something to sip while we're talking about bourbon. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch the camera view just so that you can see my screen. So I have the chat open. I'm gonna open it up in another window. So feel free to go ahead and ask questions on the chat. If you have any questions, interrupt me at any time. So the whiskey shot sour is a very classic cocktail. Its components is of a sour template. You have your sweetener, your sour, and then you have your spirit. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with the sweetener, which is easily made at home. It's just 1 part sugar to 1 part water. Mix it up until the sugar's dissolved, and then you have your simple syrup. And so this one's a little bit straining, a little bit hard to get out. All right, there we go. So we're gonna go ahead and add 3/4 ounce of simple syrup. Put that to the side. And then next you need your lemon juice, which is your sour. So we're gonna go ahead and squeeze a fresh lemon right in. Again, it's also 3/4, so go ahead and squeeze that in. Ooh, exactly 3/4, perfect. Great. Next, we add our spirit. So the spirit of choice I'm going to be using is going to be the High West American Prairie Bourbon. Oh, my apologies. So you can see the label here. It is distilled in Utah. And I believe that when you buy a bottle, a portion of it does go to the national parks in the US. And we're gonna go ahead and add 2 ounces of this straight in. And so some whiskey sour templates add 1.5. It's up to you, but I like to add 2 because then it allows for the spirit to be more pronounced in the cocktail. And of course, the next step, you can opt in or opt out of an egg white. Now, this part is interesting because what egg white does to a cocktail is give it a frothy and smooth, velvety flavor. And so a key thing about egg white is that you want to make sure that you don't crack it on top of your tin, because what if the yolk falls in there, right? You want to crack it into a secondary container first to make sure that it's also not spoiled, but you do not add the yolk inside when the cocktail does not call for it. Ooh. All right, just good, just drip it up. There we go. I'm gonna set that yolk to the side. Of course, I'm not gonna waste it. It's full of nutrients. I'm gonna go ahead and eat that for lunch later. And then and you can see now that it's a perfectly fine egg white. So you just go ahead and add it in to your cocktail. So a good replacement for egg white would be aquafaba, which is when you buy canned chickpeas, that liquid inside is called aquafaba. You can go ahead and use that. It's a great vegan replacement if you do not like egg white. And so we're not gonna add our ice yet. There are several techniques to shaking egg white. I'm gonna go ahead and use the dry shake. There's also the reverse dry shake, which is add ice, shake, dump the ice, and then go ahead and shake again. But I'm gonna go ahead and use the other method, which is just dry shake first and then add the ice. And so this is pretty quiet. So what it does, it just froths up the egg white and then you're emulsifying the egg. And so this creates all the froth and the bubbles. So you want to make sure you're shaking it hard. All right. And make sure you cap it really tightly, because there's been times where it wants to separate and then you'll end up spilling your cocktail everywhere. It's happened to me once. And next, we're gonna go ahead and add our ice to chill the cocktail and dilute it now. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add a little bit of 1-inch cubes or small ice cubes in there. And another tip I wanna teach you guys is that I learned from the cocktailians in Booker and Gax in New York City that to create a great froth in your cocktail or your egg white cocktail, you want to add 1 large cube. I don't know what the science is behind it, but it's been seen that it creates, when Dave Broom, I believe, he compared the two, one shaken with a large ice cube, one shaken without. The one with the large ice cube definitely added a little bit more layer of the froth. Someone asked, when would I use a dry shake over the ice shake method? So a dry shake is usually used when you have cream, when you have egg white. Those are the only two that I can come up with at the top of my head right now. So it should be nice and cooled and diluted now. And so we're gonna go ahead and strain that into our glass. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add 1 large ice cube in there. Boom. And go ahead and strain it in. And so the froth will take a while to form, so you're gonna have to let it sit for a few seconds. A good tip too is to tap. You can see now that the froth is starting to form. It's still taking a little bit of time, but it's beautiful enough, because what happens with shaking with egg white or aquafaba, you generate that froth, and then there's that layer that you can actually paint something on top of your cocktail. So the garnish, some people do a lemon slice, some people do a maraschino cherry. However, I like to paint with Angostura bitters. So what I'm going to take is a bottle, little drops, drop 5 drops right here. Ooh, didn't come out as pretty as I thought it would, because there's that ice cube sitting. And what you can do is you can take a toothpick. You know how like latte artists, they draw something on top? This is kind of like cocktail artists, where you're gonna draw a little bit of leaves right there. So I don't know if you can see it, but that ice cube is irritating me. But regardless, that is the garnish. So the Angostura bitters also adds a little bit of aroma, some flavors. When you sip on that whiskey sour, it just tastes amazing. So again, the dry shake versus the over ice shake method. The dry shake usually is only done when there's a reason to emulsify the cocktail, add a little bit more aeration, which is for egg whites and for cream most of the time. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop share so you can see my face. Let's take a sip of this whiskey sour before I delve into a brief history of bourbon. It is pretty good. It is pretty good. All right, let's go into a brief history and the rise of bourbon while I sip on this before I get into 2 more cocktails. So first off, the European settlers, they came over back when they settled into Eastern America, and they took barley with them because that was what Scotch was made out of. However, barley took time to acclimate to the new climate, the new soil, and because of that, they tried different grains, and rye, which was what was originally used for rye bread, was the one that acclimated quickly. And so they used rye first to distill. Now, because of that, rye was the spirit of choice initially. And these settlers were from farm backgrounds, so distilling was no problem for them. They had no issues, and they got together, and that's what became the birth of whiskey. It happened in the Delaware River Valley. And actually, a fun fact, producing whiskey is actually an act of rebellion. It actually wasn't a fun choice. Someone decided, let's distill whiskey one day. It's because rum was already existed before whiskey. And when the British took over the French and monopolized on all the molasses, what happened was, okay, well, I don't want to pay outrageous prices for molasses. I'm going to find something else. And so that's why they started to distill grains, and that's how whiskey came to be. Go ahead and tell that to your mother on tomorrow. So amazingly enough, of course, people don't like paying more than they need to. So like one example is the 1791 whiskey tax that was imposed. This was trying to recover some debt from the war that time. And of course, the government went out, tried to collect from these distillers. People hated it. There was a whiskey rebellion that took place. It was not until Thomas Jefferson, our third president, he repealed the tax. And at that time, he wondered, well, we should categorize all this whiskey, because at that time, there was just so much like moonshining going on. There was so much different types of whiskey, how it was distilled. He wanted to categorize and specify which whiskeys would be taxed in what way and categorize them. And so that's how the categories came to be. So you have rye whiskey, which the rule is it must contain at least 51% rye. And then bourbon whiskey, which must contain at least 51% corn. And so the rest could be anything. But of course, you cannot add any coloring of any kind. So when you're drinking bourbon whiskey, you know that you're not drinking brown food coloring. It's all natural, comes from the barrels, because it's new American oak charred barrels. So now we're into bourbon. So rye transformed into pretty much like the taste of America became bourbon, because bourbon comes from corn, which is sweeter. When you think of bourbon and corn, you think of, oh, the sweet, buttery popcorn kind of flavors, very smooth. And so that's really how bourbon tastes. And of course, there's a lot of variety in bourbon, because again, don't forget, the rule is at least 51% corn. That other 49%, it could be anything. Heck, you can distill with 39% rye, you can do 20% rye, you can do some barley. And so different combinations, that's what creates such a big and vast world of bourbon whiskey. You see that all on the shelves in the liquor stores. And so there's so much to try. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and name some fun facts for you now, because bourbon, after Prohibition, people just preferred sweeter flavors. And so that's pretty much how bourbon came to be. It also was a very, I wouldn't say rampant, but it was just everywhere. They grew the crop everywhere in Kentucky. And so they used corn to distill for that reason. Now there's so much history behind bourbon, but I'm very limited on time because this class is only 30 minutes. And I do want to show you 2 more cocktails, but before the 2 cocktails, I do want to name a little bit of some fun facts for you about bourbon before I get into those 2 cocktails you can create for Mother's Day. So first off, when you think of bourbon, you're like, well, bourbon's kind of a strange name, right? You think about it, rye whiskey, you have distilled from rye, bourbon's from no, it's from corn, right? So where did the name bourbon come from? So there's 2 stories out there. One is that a French royal family called the Bourbons, they actually labeled their barrels with their names because they wanted to distinguish their bourbon whiskey from the rye whiskey barrels that were sent out to customers. And it was also another form of advertising, of course. And is that a word? Funnily? I don't know. But funny enough, they sent these barrels down the Ohio River. Isn't that interesting? They sent it down Ohio River. They just go ahead and dump that in the river and down it goes. Because at that time, the roads weren't paved. There wasn't a railroad system yet. And so because of that, the Ohio River, which ran all the way down to the Mississippi River and then to New Orleans, that's how customers down south and family members and friends got their whiskey. So the second story comes from New Orleans, where you're probably familiar, if you've been in New Orleans, of Bourbon Street. And Bourbon Street, people would ask, can I get that whiskey from Bourbon Street? And so with that, people just recognize the whiskey there as bourbon whiskey. And it was just a coincidence that it happened to be really bourbon whiskey, not rye whiskey. And so because of that, the name just stuck. And so there you got that too. And so my last fun fact for you too about bourbon is that it can be distilled anywhere in the USA. However, if you do see a whiskey, let me try to find it, such as Four Roses, it does say Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It legally can only say Kentucky when it's distilled and or blended with Kentucky whiskey. All right, so I do have a good amount of time left to show you guys 2 cocktails for Mother's Day. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. So in honor of Kentucky bourbon whiskey, we're gonna go ahead and make the Brown Derby. The Kentucky Derby happens once a year. It happens on the first Saturday of May, I believe, and was a week ago, May 1st for this year. So this is also a shaken cocktail. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab our shaker tin. And first things first is we're going to add our honey syrup. So I already pre-made this because honey is very viscous and I don't want you guys watching me try to dilute the honey. And so honey already has water content in there. So you don't want to add 1 part honey, 1 part water. That'll be a little bit too diluted. The general rule to follow is probably around 3/4 of honey to 1/4 of water. And that would be just enough to dilute into a honey syrup. So we're gonna add 1/2 ounce in there. Next, we're gonna go ahead and add grapefruit juice. I do have a ginormous grapefruit right here. And of course, I cannot use a citrus squeezer for this because that'd just be ridiculous. So I'm gonna go ahead and just squeeze out the juices by hand. And we're gonna need 1 ounce of grapefruit juice in. Next, we're gonna add 1/4 ounce of lemon juice. Now that's a very small amount, but that's for flavor tweaking because I like my Brown Derby a little bit more tangy, and the grapefruit is not as sour as lemon juice. And so you can use lemon juice to adjust. So it's only 1/4 ounce in there. And then next, I'm gonna go ahead and add our bourbon. So this is a very simple cocktail. It just replaces lemon juice with grapefruit juice and simple syrup with honey syrup. Ratios were a little changed, but you just adjust according to taste. It's also a sour cocktail. And so here we have Four Roses small batch cocktail, Kentucky whiskey in honor of Kentucky Derby. We're gonna go ahead and use this. So Four Roses tends to be a little bit spicier, and so this adds a bold kick to this cocktail. And we're gonna go ahead and add 2 ounces in. Great. And so that's pretty much it, but I'm also gonna kick it up with a saline solution that I made. Dave Arnold from Liquid Intelligence book goes over this. As I mentioned in previous courses, you just need 2 drops of saline solution. How to create it is 80 mils of water with 20 grams of salt. And all you need is 2 drops. And so just like cooking, what salt does is it helps mask any unwanted bitter flavors in there, any harsh flavors that you don't want. And so it just kicks up any cocktails with citrus in it. I'm gonna go ahead and add my ice now. And I'm gonna just go ahead and shake it up. General tip also, shaking, the general rule is around 12 seconds to 15 seconds is more than enough. No need to shake off, it's just for excess flair when you shake for 30 seconds. It'll probably freeze your hands too. So we're gonna grab our coupe glass and double strain it in for our Brown Derby. So we're gonna go ahead and finish this with a garnish. From what I've learned, a Brown Derby actually doesn't come with a garnish, but I feel like it's missing something when it doesn't have a garnish. So I'm just gonna go ahead and peel off a little bit of that grapefruit peel. Just express the oils on top by squeezing the peel in half, hot dog style. rimmed glass and drop it in. And here is our brown derby. So it's another sour cocktail, very simple to make. And when you drink it, it's just, that grapefruit just really pops, especially when you express the grapefruit oils over it. Delicious. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this to the side and quickly go over one more cocktail, which is the Rye Cappuccino. So this one is from famous cocktail bartender Sutter Teague, who owns Amore y Amargo in New York City. I'm gonna go ahead and grab our glass. It's also another shaken cocktail, so we're gonna go ahead, oops, that's blocking away, and grab our shaker tin. So real quickly, I'm just gonna pay homage to rye whiskey because that was the spirit of choice in America before. And so first things first, we're gonna go ahead and add our chocolate bitters. So this will just add a spicy chocolate flavors to it. It pairs with cappuccino, or I guess you can say not cappuccino, coffee really well. So I'm using Fee Brothers Aztec chocolate bitters. Next, I'm gonna go ahead and add our Demerara syrup. So of course, instead of simple syrup, it's Demerara sugar that's used, not regular sugar. So it's the same thing, 1 part water, 1 part brown sugar. And I'm only just gonna add half an ounce into this mix. So what Demerara sugar does is it has molasses sprayed on top of the sugar. And so with that, the molasses pairs really well with whiskey because of the oak flavors and the barrel flavors. And so afterwards, we're gonna go ahead and add 1 ounce of our cold espresso. I already pre-made this. You're not gonna wait for me to make coffee here. So we're just gonna go ahead and add that in. The stronger the coffee, the better, my recommendation. It pairs really well with rye. And then afterwards, we're gonna add 3/4 of heavy cream. So what I'm using is heavy whipping cream from Organics. You can get that at your local supermarket. There we go, 3/4 ounce in. And last but not least, followed by our rye. So I'm gonna use Woodford Rye Kentucky whiskey. And 2 ounces straight in. So I'm gonna go ahead and use the whiskey to wash a little bit of the cream off the jigger. There we go, perfect. So this is perfect for the mothers out there that love coffee, because what's more stressful than being a mother, right? They're gonna need coffee on most of their days. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and add our ice and go ahead and just shake it up. For this cocktail, you do want to shake it really hard because it does have heavy cream in it. And what it does is also creates a nice broth. A little different from egg white because egg white contains those a lot of proteins in it. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and double strain so we don't get ice shards into our drink. So I'm just gonna set this to the side right now because this is our last cocktail. So I'm gonna wait for the foam to rise up from the heavy cream. But what you can do once it rises up, you can kind of see it. I'm not sure. The lighting is not the best here because of the window, but after that, you just add 3 coffee beans right here in the middle, and that is your garnish for this Rye Cappuccino from Sutter Teague in Amore y Amargo. The rye pairs really well with the espresso because of the spiciness character of the rye, and then of course the bitter characteristics of the espresso. It just melds together really well. Combined with cream, it just tastes like a cappuccino. And so I'm gonna go ahead and switch back, and I'm gonna go ahead and take a sip of this Rye Cappuccino. Wonderful. It really does taste like a cappuccino, I'm telling you right now. So that's pretty much it. It is already 12:28. That was 3 cocktails. I will be posting these recipes in a later email tonight, along with the recording for this video. My apologies again if the internet connection was not stable throughout this recording. There's probably some issues right now, but that's on my part. My apologies there. But I hope you enjoyed and you learned something new a little bit about bourbon. Bourbon whiskey, there's just so much to explore. I can't really cram the history down in 20 minutes. I have to save time for whiskey as well, right? To make that whiskey. So I hope you learned something. I'll send out the list of ingredients later on tonight. I'll be here for another 1 or 2 minutes if you have any questions or comments. Thank you for joining again, and we look forward to seeing you in our next class, which we go over, well, Mother's Day. What comes next? Oops, my apologies. What comes next after Mother's Day? Father's Day. So we're gonna go over Scotch whiskey at that time. So you're welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you. So out of all these cocktails, I would personally say the Rye Cappuccino is my favorite. It's just rye whiskey I love the fruity and the spicy flavors of it. I don't know. That's just me though. Everyone's different. Bourbon tends to be sweeter. Some people like the sweet characteristics of bourbon. This is just grapefruit juice, I swear. So somebody asked, what if they don't like heavy cream? Can they use something else? I've never personally tried. You could try regular cream and see how it does. You could maybe also try milk. I have mixed milk with coffee before, and it tastes great. You can try that. Heavy cream, what happens is it just helps create more froth because it has some proteins in there. And that adds for a velvety texture, just kind of like egg white. But try milk. Maybe milk would help out. If milk doesn't work, man, just try a coffee liqueur instead. That might actually replace the espresso with a coffee liqueur such as a St. George Nola or a Mr. Black. And then opt for no cream, but instead use a little bit more sugar. And then, yeah, I think that's an interesting concoction. I'll have to try that. Thank you for that question. I hope that helped. Yes, Rye Cappuccino on a stressful day is great. It is wonderful. And cheers to all our mother figures out there because they work really hard, you know, and without them, we wouldn't be here. So cheers, Rye Cappuccino. All right, well, it is 12:31. I don't want to hold people up. Thank you so much for staying. Thank you so much for joining. And I hope to see you next time in our next class to celebrate Father's Day on Scotch whiskey. All right, thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you next time.